There's a secret world just outside the hospital walls where clinicians trade stethoscopes for startups. If you've ever wondered how someone goes from seeing patients to building the future of healthcare, you're in the right place. I'm Kayla, a PA on a mission to figure out what comes next. When I started researching careers in health tech, I found confusing job titles and zero clarity on how clinicians actually made the transition. So I went straight to the source, the people who already did it. Each week, we demystify a specific career path by someone who's already living it, whether it's from the bedside to the boardroom, the startup, or something completely different. Whether you're planning your exit, passively curious, or already working in health tech, this is your insider's guide. Welcome to Corporate Espionage. And today we have Caleb Williams. He is a nurse innovator whose impact is felt far beyond the hospital walls. During his time as an ER and ICU nurse, he went above and beyond in becoming ICU supervisor at just 24 years old and an active member of inpatient leadership. He is the founder of Med Content Pros, a marketing agency that helps companies reach more clinicians with their messaging. More recently, he's the chief clinical officer of Crimson Medical Solutions, where he translates his lived clinical experience into product development and implementation of a game-changing hardware solution for ICU nurses. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Caleb. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, great to be here and great to talk about the innovation journey.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so I am curious from you. Tell me your story. Like, how did you end up in healthcare? I know you have a little bit of a transcontinental journey in your past, and I would love to hear more about how you got to healthcare in the first place. Like, what drew you in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, I grew up in New Zealand. I moved to the United States when I was 18 years old, mainly because the opportunities exist over here educationally and career opportunities. I guess what drew me to healthcare initially in the first place was kind of I reached that stage in life where, you have to make your decision about what you're going to do with your career and getting out of high school. And I was really looking for an opportunity where I could both have a decent income, throughout life but also have a skill set that really helped other people. I didn't want to just go out there and make money. I wanted to make sure that, I was able to support a family one day, but then also that I had some kind of skill that would be usable throughout life where I could add a lot of value to people and just improve their lives really ultimately. That's ultimately what healthcare is about, right? Improving other people's lives. And nursing stood out to me as a great way to fit both of those in the same career path where you could, make an impact on other people's lives, but then also, you're able to make a good income as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I definitely identify with that service-driven locus of focus in my life as well. So totally, totally resonate with you. So, as a nurse, talk me through a little bit about your journey there. What sort of settings did you work in?
Yeah. Yeah. So I started off, I did an associate's program, finished that, worked as a, CNA during nursing school, got some exposure to hospital settings and kind of got a feel for what the different units are like for what appealed to me, what didn't appeal to me, that kind of thing. So I did that in upstate New York and then moved to Philadelphia for my bachelor's. While I was doing that, I got a position as, initially as a cardiac step-down unit nurse. Got a lot of exposure. It was a very, uh, large hospital and a very, new team of nurses. So it was a very interesting experience, just kind of growing together and, learning rapidly. Um, After about a year and a half of that, I got a position as a charge nurse ICU, took those skills and went to an ICU setting, worked in the ICU for about a year and I got trained into a charge position. Um, and really love the ICU setting. I like the depth that you go into with each patient. And really ICU, I really liked ICU because of basically the depth you get with your patient. You understand the pressure of every heartbeat and, the electrical scene. You just get so deep into every aspect of the patient and it just requires that higher level of expertise. So I did ICU probably for close to about 5 years. After that point, um, what had happened was the charge nurse position I was in was basically 2 days a week instead of three, and it paid during those 2 days what you'd make in three as a weekend nights position, and which was great for me during school because I was doing school during the day and then
Yeah, yeah.
the nursing during the night. Um, but what happened was we ran into a period probably of about 4 months where 1 out of every 4 shifts I was getting low census. Uh, and that starts to add up after a while. So I ended up
Uh-huh.
cross training at that point for ER and fell in love with ER as well. It's
Oh, okay.
completely different than ICU because ICU, you're going so
Yeah.
deep into the patient. But I liked ER too because you got the breadth. You cover
Yeah.
everything from psych to peds to, whatever walks through the door basically, except for maternity. Thankfully, we always shipped those up as fast as we could. But yeah, I really liked ER. It was kind of a nice change in pace because after doing ICU for several years, you start to have every sepsis patient starts to kind of feel the same.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
you learn the steps.
exactly. And ER was great because it was different. You had everything under the sun. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. So it was kind of my professional journey throughout the bedside, I should say.
Awesome. So you went really, really deep, and then you went really, really broad
Absolutely. Which I
in
really,
all
really enjoyed
aspects.
because they both filled a knowledge gap and experience gap that the other one didn't really have to offer.
Yeah.
Very different ways of
As
practicing, though.
Absolutely. As someone who has worked urgent care and ER in my professional career, ER is fantastic, right? That delivery of care I personally love because I love like the challenge of getting on someone's good side in less than 90 seconds and like
Yeah.
establishing trust so quickly, like the instant that you walk into the room. But there is that downside that I never really get to figure out what happened. I never get to
hmm
feel satisfied about knowing the conclusion of patients or knowing ultimately their outcomes unless I take the time to follow up with them. And we all know that after a busy shift, sometimes that is just not feasible. ICU is something that sounds like such an interesting and, like you said, uh, deep journey through every system of a patient in the span of usually days to weeks, right?
Yeah, no,
If
absolutely.
not
That was
longer.
one big change going from ICU to ER is ICU, you're so used to knowing what the end is,
Yeah,
because even if that patient gets shipped out or passes or something when you're not there, you come back and, oh, where's Mr. So-and-so?
right.
ER was very much, we got Ross, ship him upstairs, and then you have no idea what happened.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's a good thing because you're like,
Yeah, it's
oh
true.
my gosh, that is terrifying. I'm going to be thinking about that for the next 3 weeks, you know?
hmm No, for
Yeah.
sure.
Cool. So, with all of your experience in nursing, going from the ICU to the ER and everything in between, at one point, did you have that tickle in the back of your mind that was telling you that this wasn't the last of your story? Like that there was more to the story and that you need to be essentially disrupting the status quo?
That's a good question. So I think for me, the first time that it even occurred to me, I would say, was while I was going for my bachelor's degree. Um, the school that I went to had a undergraduate club that was specifically from the business school, but designed for um, healthcare related studies. So it was a lot of people who were going for nursing or pre-med or even med that were part of this club. But it was very business oriented. You have people coming in and giving presentations, a lot of clinicians. And I remember one thing one speaker said that stuck with me, that it just kind of stood out to me and always kind of stuck with me, was he said, he was a physician, and he said, one recommendation I would have to any of you is that whatever you do with your careers, because you're all going for basically medical type careers, he said, practice for at least a year before you go and do whatever you're going to do. And as a nurse who was already practicing and was going for learning how to practice better, it kind of stood out to me like, wait, what else is there? What else would you do? Why would you even say that?
Yeah,
Like my thought was, get the license and practice. My thought
for
wasn't
sure.
go do something else with this. So that kind of was the very first time where I think it kind of occurred to me like, oh, maybe there's something more than just being at the bedside. I say just being at the bedside. Being at the bedside, I love. It's great. You do get to have a unique connection with people that you don't really get any other way. But one thing that I kind of learned through, especially I would say that club during my bachelor's was that you can make a big difference for a lot of people by helping bring an innovation to market or a service to market that's not out there. Whereas the bedside, you can touch patients one at a time in a deeper way, but only one at a time. And so I think that kind of stood out to me kind of early on is where it started. But the actual beginning of my journey kind of started around the time that I cross trained for ER and was getting basically called off all those ICU shifts in a row. Because at one point in there, before I started cross training for ER, I had just recently got married and was looking at all of a sudden I had this big cut in my income that I wasn't expecting, and the shifts aren't there, and I'm in school the rest of during the weekdays, so I can't just go pick up more shifts. And I was basically exploring, like, what are some other ways I could go out there and supplement this? And I told my new wife at the time, maybe I should think about like Uber or something. And she's like, "You're a nurse. Surely you could do something besides Uber that would make you more money than that." And so I started looking around and I ran across Upwork. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yeah,
Upwork before.
of course.
So they basically what their premise of their site is they find people who have projects and a freelancer, they match them together. And it's
Yep.
everything from, a $3 logo that's outsourced overseas to, $900 an hour lawyers here in the US. And so I ran across that during that search and started like trying to do medical writing. I called it, I'm like, I can write medical stuff,
Yeah.
and started landing a few jobs, and then eventually kind of found a steady need for it. Especially the niche that I landed in was B2B marketing messaging for clinicians, because there's a big need for that. And a lot of companies, even big companies, don't understand how to craft that messaging well in a way that actually resonates with clinicians themselves. You have a lot of people with marketing degrees who don't understand how clinicians think, trying to communicate to clinicians. So bridging that gap was where I kind of found that big need and started doing that kind of very, very part-time, more as a very side project kind of thing during those days.
Did you have any prior writing experience
Not beyond school. Nope. I mean,
or marketing experience?
no marketing experience at all. No, not at all. So
Fantastic.
the way that it kind of grew, because today, I mean, the way I make my living today, I'm doing two things. I'm with Crimson Medical, of course, as their chief clinical officer, but we're still pre-revenue. Well, actually, no, we just recently hit revenue, but we're still very early in our process. So it's all equity based. So it's not, generating livable income at this point. But the way that I currently make my living is all basically that B2B marketing messaging. Um, so the way that I've kind of grown into that was I started doing the medical writing, found somebody who needed, something written, wrote it, just kind of one-off little project. And after building up a few of those little projects, you had more of a base where you could look back on and say, well, I did this for this person and this for this person. And then I think I ran across my first real project was um, a company, I forget the context of it, but basically they needed a bunch of scripts written for their telephone people to, if someone had diabetes, well, here's the questions you walk through and here's the answers you give to these common questions.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and that created like a sustainable long-term project, probably for about 6 months, and it was bringing in about $300 a week or so. And it was the first time where I ever had anything like that. It's like, man, this is pretty cool. Like an extra few hundred
Yeah.
bucks a week, I can just sit at home on my computer. It's, I have 3 shifts on, 4 shifts off. I can use one of those days to do this. And from there, built on that project, kind of I started finding a lot of work in blogs. Of course, this is
Okay.
pre-AI, but
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of blog writing. And from that, worked with marketing teams a lot, because they're like, well, here's our marketing plan. Here's how, we're planning for this blog to go. And you learn through just doing it so much what marketing teams are looking for, what they consider success, how they structure their blogs. You learn that if you're writing anything in marketing, the two most important things are the audience. You have to know the audience and the goal of the piece. And it's amazing to me just how much, you'll see pieces written sometimes that really don't have a goal or really are for an audience. And, so you learn those things over time. And it got to the point where about a couple of years ago, it kind of had built up enough knowledge in the marketing world where most of it was executional before then, writing blogs, writing white papers, helping create scripts for videos that companies are using, that kind of thing. But a couple of years ago, I kind of reached the point where I was able to offer strategic insights to people in marketing based on all these other projects I had done, where they actually found them valuable. And so that was a big transition point for me, because I was able to kind of go from, oh, I'll help you execute your plan, to, well, here's how I did it with this team, and here's what worked for them, and here's what didn't work for them,
Yep.
and
Yep.
be able to offer those strategic insights, to where now really probably I'm more focused on helping with strategy and then the execution of that strategy, which has been able to add like a lot of value. And again, all focused on clinicians specifically.
Absolutely. That's amazing. So you essentially needed a little bit of extra money,
Hmm.
found this very niche problem that companies were having, figured like, hey, I'll sit on my couch in my pajamas and write some scripts for nurses, for anyone who works in the healthcare space. That snowballed into you being an expert in that field so much that now you are essentially consulting
Hmm. Yeah,
and
exactly.
you are still in that capacity.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that I did
That's
not
awesome.
anticipate that happened is when you've written a blog, you can go to this company B and say, I've written a blog before, have me do yours. And they can look at that and
Yeah.
say, oh, okay, we'll hire you. Then when you go to company C, you can say, oh, I've written blogs for two different companies. And each time you get a project, at least for me, it was like each time you add to that, resume or portfolio,
Portfolio.
if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's gone to the point now where I've worked for Fortune 500 companies and startups and companies, some you've never heard of, some that, are very recognizable, and all kinds of different initiatives that now whenever I pitch to a new client, it's very easy to say, oh, okay, well, here are the projects I've done that match what you're looking for. Here's how I did them and here's how it turned out. So
Yep.
that's been really, really cool. And the great thing too about being in nursing was I was able to build up to that pretty slowly, because right now I do that full time, but it wasn't, I think a traditional job, if you went to go 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, it would be very, very hard to find the time to do that. You'd have to do it on your weekend. And then it would also be hard to gradually ramp it up, which I was able to do. So when my first daughter was born, I actually cut down to 2 shifts a week, was kind of my first step, because I was making enough where I was like, I can supplement this.
Yeah.
And then invested that extra day into getting new clients, new projects, and it just grew even more. And then around the time of COVID, my second daughter was born. Um, and it was right at that point. I remember, just because, it's a big milestone in the personal life, but
Yeah.
during COVID, there was such a need for information out there from somebody who knew what they were talking about. And so that's really where the writing blew up for me. It was all of a sudden like, oh, now I have more work than I can handle. And I dropped down to 1 shift a month. And then I very quickly found that you're just going in one weekend a month is a little bit irritating, and then also, you're for each shift you're having to go in for ACLS and PALS and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, like this is
You
going to be a
didn't
bit
like
much.
the pretty and princess life?
Not particularly. The biggest step for me was going from health insurance to figuring it out yourself. That was the big thing for me.
Yeah, definitely. Along those lines, you're coming from a very structured environment. One could argue that you're stepping into in the ER or in the ICU on any unit, you're stepping into a structure that really has already been pre-established. You know what your role
Hmm.
is. You know exactly what you're going to show up and do. You may have curveballs thrown at you throughout the day, of course, but in a general sense, you kind of get the idea of really where your footing is at any given time,
Hmm.
anywhere between 3 and 4 months of being on a new job, right?
Yeah.
However, when you are founding your own company and selling your own services and exploring this world where number one, you didn't like go to school for it, so to speak. Number two, no one is keeping you accountable. No one is setting the rules for you. No one is
Hmm.
telling you, hey, this is what works and this is what doesn't work. How did you was there anything that you found particularly effective for you in shifting your mindset of like how you showed up to a work day, so to speak? And what was that process of like unlearning and relearning like for you?
Yeah, no, those are very good questions and definitely important things to think about. It is very, very different making the transition from a structured employee-employer relationship to being your own boss. And there's some great perks. You can have all the unpaid time off you want, but it's all unpaid. So there's that
Right.
to consider. But uh the developing discipline, I would say, would be a part of it for sure. You do have to sit down and do the work. And the way that I did that with my writing was very much I set clear deadlines. And if I have a clear deadline with a client, you always meet that deadline. And you're ahead of half the crowd if you do always meet your deadlines. So I set deadlines working for myself. That's what worked well for me to keep me on track, because then I can say, well, I have to have this much work done by this. There's definitely variableness to it. So, some weeks, I've had projects before that I've been able to land, unfortunately, not all the time, but, just kind of a once-off project where someone needs something in a rush where you can literally charge what you want and like make $500 an hour for 3 hours, because, that's how long it takes you to do this $1,500 project, which is really, really nice when you get those kinds of things. Not all the time, unfortunately, but, you can have a lot of variableness. Some weeks, you have more work than you can handle. Other weeks, it's like, man, I need to get more work. So there's that element to deal with. I think one way that I think about it from looking at it from versus being employed to being your own boss is that whenever you work for an employer, your employer sets your wage, and the value you're adding to your employer has to be more than that wage. A lot of times, probably significantly higher. So, let's say you're a nurse and let's say they pay you, $45 an hour. You're probably adding on an average hour to the hospital, if I had to guess, like $150 to $200 worth of value. But as a nurse, you only get to keep 45 of that, and the hospital has the
Right.
rest. And in exchange for that, they give you a regular job that you can depend on. You don't have to worry about it. They just send you the paycheck every 2 weeks. But you miss out on a lot of that value that you can capture. And I have found that working for yourself, you get to capture all that value. Whatever value you can add, of course, you do have to be able to figure out how you can add that value. But once you can figure out how to add that value, you can capture that value for yourself, and you get 100% of it.
I love it. Yeah, that's absolutely a huge transition. I've had a few friends who have gone from being an employee to self-employed in the past few years. I think COVID really opened up a huge opportunity for a lot of people to do that. I have a friend who is like a Smartsheet expert. Have you ever used Smartsheet before? Similar to like Airtable, like a sort of
Okay.
central note-taking, form-filling place.
Hmm.
Um, she went from using Smartsheet as just one of the products in her company's tech stack to teaching it to internal employees to now she makes a living teaching people how to use Smartsheet. She uses
Wow.
Upwork as her platform, and she, creates entire programs for different companies utilizing Smartsheet and Smartsheet only. And it's amazing. Like she's had so much growth over the past couple years. Used to work for a very large beer distributor in the country, and to see her kind of journey through that,
Hmm.
I see a sense of both accountability and stress in sometimes, but also a sense of
Yeah.
confidence and lightness that has totally changed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's very freeing to be your own boss in some ways. In some ways, you have to chase down invoices and, hey, make sure you pay me for this. It's been a month,
Yeah,
So there's
for
that
sure.
element to consider.
Yeah.
And I've had that with some clients where it's been like, 3 or 4 months and you've done all this work and you're like, I need to get
Yeah, yeah.
paid. So, there's a different set of stresses that come with it, but it's very freeing from the standpoint of you can choose which clients you're going to work with. You can choose, what hours you're going to work. If you want to take a day off randomly, you can. But then, of course, you have to balance that out with, how much do you want to be producing? How much money do you want to be making? One of the great challenges, and I'm still trying to figure this one out, is there's an element of uh, when you're working for yourself, there's work that you're doing that's making money, and then there's work that you're doing that's building your future. And trying to balance those out is really kind of tough, because you do too much work building the future, you're going to starve to death now. Or you can make as much as you can now, but you're never going to make more because you're not building your future. So finding that balance, I feel like, is very difficult and something I'm still in the process of. But you kind of perfect the process as you grow over the course of that journey.
Yeah. What's something that you've done in the past, like 2 weeks, that you would consider making money versus building your future?
Oh, I think for me, because I am doing the medical writing and consulting, and the messaging strategy consulting, that's primarily the making the money. And then the work I'm doing with Crimson Medical is very much the opposite. It's entirely future based. There's no funds at all from that. So that's the starkest example. But even in my writing and consulting, I've one thing that I have found myself dropping into the rut of is I have, two big clients right now that are very consistent in their work. And it can be very easy sometimes to get settled when you're in that position of, okay, I have consistent clients. I know there'll be work tomorrow and next week and next month. And, it could be like, well, I need to make a better process of going out and getting new clients. So the last 2 weeks, actually, I've been working on focusing on that process, perfecting that process in addition to the actual getting of the work done. So that's, I guess, another example of it.
I see. Great examples. What did you find more than anything that companies were missing in their messaging that was not reaching people in healthcare?
Um, I think it's just a misunderstanding of how clinicians think. Clinicians are much more open to an empathy-oriented messaging, um, where they'll consider the patient impact more than a business person would necessarily. But it
Uh-huh.
also depends on your clinician too. Like if it's a physician running their own practice, maybe they will be more open to a business proposition. But you tell a nurse, hey, if you do this, it'll save your hospital X amount of money. Okay, they're going to care about that, but they're going to care far more about, well, how does it make the patient feel? How does it make my workflows? Is it going to be an extra step? And so that's one side of it, I think. I think the other step is that marketers often underestimate how data-driven physicians, clinicians in general are, because, we're trained to use evidence-based practice to learn, you know, there was this study and they did this intervention and it made the placebo was this and the control was this. And therefore we know that this works better than that. And marketers sometimes I feel like don't take a great advantage of that, of thinking about how clinicians evaluate evidence and working that into their marketing. So those I'd say are
Yeah.
two big areas that they miss.
Okay. I would love to hear more about Crimson Medical and the solution that you're building there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can go into a little bit more depth too about kind of how I got to there, because I went through
Yeah,
another couple products. So
absolutely. Please give me
yeah,
everything.
so I've gone through basically kind of two different branches. So the medical writing and side of thing has been one branch. The
Okay.
other branch that kind of started probably around the same time as the medical writing was I kind of realized one is medical writing is very service based. So you always got to be doing it, or you've got to be able to train somebody else how to do it, which is harder when you've been building the knowledge for yourself. Like how do you systematize it, have it not be you doing the work, I guess, is an important question that I'm still trying to figure out. But the ultimate goal in business is to kind of develop that passive income where you can
Yep.
seek the projects, get the project done, and you're not having to be the one sitting there doing it the whole time. And as nurses and ERs, that's what we do. Somebody else developed the system on how care is provided in ER, and then the shareholders are sitting back while you do the work and make them the money because they've come up with the process. Um, but one thing that I found early on is like a product is a good way to achieve that. And it's scalable beyond just yourself. The other thing that I love and primarily drives me with product innovation is you can change things for the better. As a nurse all the time, you see I'm sure you saw it all the time. There's all kinds of things. You're like, why do we do it this way? And trying to
Yes.
change a system can be so frustrating. I remember working as an ER nurse one place, and they had their main trauma bay, and it was always frigid in there. It was always for some reason they always kept the temperature down at
Wait, I had
60
the exact
degrees.
same experience. Who did this?
Well, and it was always cold, and I always try to turn it up, and someone would always turn it back down. And I was like, and I went through 2 months of here's the triad of death. One of the things in the triad of death is hypothermia. The trauma triad of death. We should be keeping our trauma room higher than normal body temperature, not lower. We're going to contribute to morbidities. We're going to kill people. And trying to get the temperature of the room raised was this insurmountable task that I didn't
Yeah.
even get to achieve. And it's like, why? Why does it have
Yeah.
to be this way? So you see that kind of thing all the time. But, you know, innovating new products offers a great way to bring about those changes that you kind of wish we could have. You know, you see the problems all the time. We'll have a solution for it, and trying to get it into the hands of clinicians seems like a great way to do it. It's a little bit harder than you would think initially that I kind of ran into. But I've gone through 3 different products, and Crimson is a third of those.
Okay.
That I've been more of a team than driving it. But the first one, I came up with a little silicone thing that you use to open glass ampules without cutting your hand. You just pop it on, pop the top off. You don't have to get the gauze and the, or the alcohol wipe, because those never work. And everybody cuts themselves, and it's a pain.
Yeah.
And you never know
Yeah.
when it's going to snap, when it's going to slice your finger. And so I developed this tool, and it actually worked very well. I used it personally in practice all the time because it worked well. And I thought, because I initially had designed it for myself, and I was like, I should try to sell this.
Yeah.
And so went through looking at how to do that. And what you very quickly ran into is there's not a big market for it. You try to sell it to hospitals, they're going to buy 100 of them, and they're going to sit on a shelf for a year, or be used for a year. They're not going to need new ones right away. And so you're going to go through a lot of work to make a $1,000 to $2,000 sale maybe. And selling to hospitals is a nightmare anyway. So, go with all that for work for $2,000, and then you've got to go do it down the next place, and the next place. The math doesn't work out, unfortunately. I did do some research and tried to license it to a company that already had some kind of device that was more complicated in that space. And they actually wanted to have 200 of them and run a pilot and try it in a hospital. So I made 200 of them, sent it over. My wife and I spent 2 weeks mixing. It was like silicone caulk and cornstarch and something else. And you put it in these 3D printed molds, and you let it sit for half an hour. We had this whole factory
Science
in there.
fair.
Exactly. And sent these things over to Australia, and they piloted it and trialed it and got mold quotes and all that stuff, and ultimately decided not to use it. But because they already had an established product, I think. But it was a learning experience, and it gave me an idea of like one thing that's really, really important that I think we as clinicians underappreciate sometimes is in business, the vital sign is the finances. And you've got to understand the money. The money has to work. You can do something that you think is going to add value, but if it's not actually adding value, no one's going to purchase it. And you can tell the value that it's adding by the price people are willing to pay for it, ultimately. We have this idea about value. This role or this service or this product is really, really valuable, but really value boils down to what are people willing to pay you for it. And if you can't figure out how to add that value, it doesn't work. So that was my very first attempt at bringing a product to market, but I learned a lot about business and licensing and how to talk to companies and that kind of thing through it.
Yeah.
So
have you thought about, just as an aside, just doing direct to consumer marketing, like marketing to the nurses who are popping open glass bottles every day?
yeah,
I'm imagining, hear me out. You have that little silicone piece on like a metal chain that attaches perfectly on a lanyard or a badge.
You mean like kind of like the pen light or the forceps we carry around, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like every nurse has their badge that's like, "Hi, I'm a nurse," or it has like a cute little heart or some other funny meme on it, and then it has your badge, it has your ACLS card, it has your BLS card, it has your med reminders, like it has all that index. I have seen people carrying mini Sharpies around. I've seen people carrying little pens around. I've seen, hypothetically speaking, you could have like a bottle opener on it, It's that sort of keychain design. I wonder if you could sell this as a keep it on your, put it in your pocket, keep it on your locket type of device. Yeah. And, it's a very low cost to entry. But if one nurse tells their friend, then the other nurse tells all their friends, and everybody starts using it. And like, I would say if personally as a consumer, if it is adding value to my day to day and it costs me less than like $40 or $50,
Mhm.
easy sell. Easy sell.
Yeah. I don't think I really went down the consumer route. That's actually a good idea if I was to ever resurrect it. The other problem that I ran
Yeah.
into with it is that they're trying to get more and more away from glass ampules just in general. So it's becoming less and less of a problem because most things you can store in the ones with the rubber stopper. And then
Yeah.
you do have the hassle of opening it. You do have to use the filtered needle and all that kind of stuff. So it's becoming rarer and rarer that you've seen them even, I think from when I first started nursing to now, I've seen them less and less frequently,
Yeah.
but it is definitely an idea. Definitely a way I
They're
could have
not
considered.
100%. Yeah, they're not 100% phased out. I will tell you that. I have personally been assaulted by a glass ampule, so
Yeah.
I would that would be a solution that I would pay for.
Everybody has. That's the thing. It's like, why don't we have a solution for this? But
Yeah,
no, I
exactly,
mean,
right?
yeah. Maybe I should. I'll start a new website and put a link up in your podcast.
Yeah, very cool. I'm happy to talk more
um,
about that if you want to bounce ideas, but
yeah. No, I mean, that's a good idea. And it's not one that occurred to me at the time, I don't think. I mean, maybe it did.
awesome.
And maybe there's a reason I didn't go with it, but I don't know. It was a while ago. So from there, I kind of got a taste for the innovation and I really enjoyed the innovation. It's nice. It's fun kind of coming up with solutions for problems and how can we, which we do all the time as clinicians bedside anyways. But, I kind of got a taste for it. I was trying to think, what is a different product that I could have that actually would be more impactful, that would have, I guess, more value and actually could be turned into a company or something. And the next product idea that I had that I tried to actually launch a startup myself versus just, I have this idea and let me see what I can do with it. I actually go through the process of trying to launch a startup. Um, was developing a charting software specifically for during resuscitations on a tablet. And so, yeah, as you know, that's one of the few areas where you don't log into Epic when someone's coding. You grab
You
the
run, you jump on their
clipboard.
bed. Yeah, you
Yeah.
grab the clipboard, exactly.
And whoever's recording has that clipboard and they stand there with it. They're not in front of a computer. And the reason for that is primarily because the people at Epic don't really know what it's like to run a code. And you don't have time to find the tab for, pause C compressions or, you've got to keep things running. It's a very fast-paced environment. So what I came up with was basically a charting software where it gave you each step of the ACLS algorithm as it was due, and then you clicked on whether you did it or not. You had the ability to enter notes and stuff, but basically it had the advantage of walking you through the algorithm as you did it, making sure you stayed on track, and then simultaneously capturing the charting data live, which is, of course, the standard of care that isn't met currently. And so it was, I feel like, a pretty good idea. I still feel like it's a pretty good idea. And there's a company or two now that are doing it. But so basically what I ran into with that was kind of two problems. One is there's a huge capital barrier to entry. A development for the app, I priced out was going to be about 250 or so to 300. And so you've got to raise at least that much plus a buffer, plus enough for, getting your first few clients. So I was going to need to raise at least $500,000,
Mhm,
which sounds like a lot to a clinician, but in the business world isn't actually that bizarre. Like
mhm.
there's companies all the time that'll go out and don't have a product and will raise, especially in AI right now, you see it. Someone will go out and raise $2 million.
Yep.
But the problem that I ran into is it was me as a nurse trying to start a company. And I found someone who could be a technical co-founder and could speak to it. But the problem that you run into is as a nurse going in front of business people and not understanding as much about the business, they don't trust your ability to operate a business.
Mm,
And I think some of that isn't well deserved. Some of that maybe is. But they ask you questions, what do you think the ARR will be in 3 years? Well, what's ARR? I have no idea, And so you don't speak the language at all. And because you don't speak the language, it's becomes very evident to them you don't know a lot about business.
sure.
And there can be this, essentially for clinicians who are just getting into the business world, that could be this conception from those in the business world, like, oh, this person cares about helping people. They don't care about making money. And sometimes that's true. And if it is true, it's probably not going to work well, which is kind of unfortunate
Yeah.
because you do have to find a way to, if something's valuable find out how to make sure that the hospital or the purchaser or the end user understands that value enough that they're going to pull out their wallet and give you the money. Um, but I tried probably for about a year and a half to get it off the ground. Talked to several hospitals about potentially doing some kind of partnership to get the product developed. I had an MVP where you could walk through and kind of like play with it. It wasn't like a one you could use in a clinical setting, but it was one where you
Yeah.
could envision what the product was going to be. But basically what I really ran into was that problem of raising capital. I just wasn't going to be able to do it by myself at the stage that I was at. And I learned a lot about startups, a lot about how startups work, how to structure them, how to, what the life cycle of them people expect to be, how to talk to people at those hospitals, because connecting with people at hospitals to purchase a product is far, 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 far more difficult than you would ever think.
Sure.
And learning how to do that. So there was a lot of great lessons that I learned, but ultimately it was something that I realized I'm going to have to shell and I'm going to have to learn more about basically the business dynamics and, that aspect of things, which is really
Had
what led to
you
Crimson.
had you explored selling to EMR systems at all?
I had basically what I ran into consistently when I brought this to hospitals is, well, we spent $100 million on Epic. I'm sure they can help us with this. And of course, Epic has everything under the sun. The big problem you have when you take it to someone like Epic is it's me and a technical co-founder and no money. And you take it to Epic and they have a team of engineers. Once they see what you've made, there's no
They eat it up.
IP.
Yep.
They can do whatever they want with it. You
Yep.
can't say, oh, I have this great idea, okay, maybe we'll
Yeah.
hire you to run it. Maybe, maybe we'll just knock it off. So that whole aspect made that prohibitive. And there's only
Right.
two or three main players in the market. When you get Epic, Cerner, and Meditech, and then, they own most of the market. So there's only three shots.
Yep. Understood. So then tell me more about how the, whoa, let me step back for a second. I just had a little stroke. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Um, so then tell me about the origin story of the product that you're currently walking on.
So yeah, it's a very interesting origin stories with them. So the company started before I was part of it. It actually started with four guys in bioengineering school who had a capstone project to come up with a product in healthcare and basically design a business plan as part of their capstone project. So they came up with this idea. They surveyed nurses in their lives and said, what's a problem that you encounter frequently? And one thing that they kept coming up with was, especially in the ICU setting, like IV lines are a tangled mess and you're infusing all these medications that have to be going at very specific rates and you get one confused and all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
administering an incompatible drug or a wrong rate and you very easily kill somebody. And it just isn't a great way of keeping them organized, keeping them labeled. And if you've ever been in the ICU setting, you see they'll have nurses are innovative. They find solutions to this kind of thing. You'll see like a glove inflated and they'll put the lines between the fingers of the gloves or a tongue depressor taped to the bed and they slip the lines under, or, find some way of restoring order. And as an ICU nurse, I've seen this all the time. One of the first things you do after you assess your patient is untangle your lines. And
Mm-hmm.
2 hours later, it's back to the way it was.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so they found this problem, they found a solution for it, they designed this solution, and they actually tried to go out and start selling it as a company. They had a couple, once they got out of school, they went forward basically with it as a product that they were trying to get off the ground. And this was in 2019, so they did a couple critical access hospitals, which probably isn't the ideal, you know, place for probably ICU's more ideal, but I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they really understood that at that stage because it's kind of still learning the market. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, selling something like that to a hospital was like nigh impossible. Hospitals were just trying to keep their head above water, much less let's pilot new products. So the company kind of really went into I guess, kind of a dormant stage, or it wasn't as active. And back in around the end of 2022, they decided like, we're going to resurrect this. The time is right now. We're going to resurrect this and push forward with it. And so at that point, there were kind of two people that were still more engaged. And the thing that they realized as they were going to press forward was we really need a clinical person on board. And our CEO he's very, very active on LinkedIn, just reaching out to people cold. And he's developed a lot of
Sweet.
connections that way. And I was one of those connections. And I got an email from him like, we have this company and we're looking for advice. And I'm like, sure, they're looking to sell something to me, I'm sure. I almost didn't take the call. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll take the call and hear what he has. And maybe he is looking for advice. And then I actually forgot about the call and didn't have it on my calendar. And then
Oh my
he
gosh.
had to send me, are you still there? Do you still want to do this? And I was like, and again, I was almost like, I was going to have a coffee or whatever, but I was like, okay. So had the call with him and he actually was looking for advice and
Wow.
he had a good product. I mean, there were some changes I think that needed to be made, but as a clinician that I could see, but it was all overall a really good idea and a great solution to the problem. And so basically one thing led to another and they were like, you should come on as our chief clinical officer. So I came on as chief clinical officer. Um, I think now they kind of consider me like a co-founder and basically led the clinical side of product development. So we did a product development trial early last year where we really perfected the design into what works best for nursing workflows, and then led the clinical side of sales. Because there's a lot of interacting with chief nursing officers, ICU managers, that kind of thing. And
Certainly.
so we developed this product, and if what the product is ultimately is it's really the only thing on the market that's both a organizer and a labeler. It's kind of two in one. It's a little hard to describe. Maybe you could put a picture up there for your audience or
Mhm.
something. What it basically does is it allows you to label each line with a plastic label that is a different color for each line. So it allows you to distinguish the lines very, very easily. And then these labels can connect together and disconnect. So you can really bundle your lines where they get all tangled and keep them actually nice, parallel. Looks really, really nice. We've even had patients' families talk about how nice it looks. Um, so, so yeah, helped them with the product development. And then we actually launched it back at AONL in April and established a lot of interest. We had a lot of people very, very interested in how our product worked and implementing in
Yeah.
their ICUs. And then it's just been the process of following up with those leads, setting up pilots, starting out pilots. We just really started pilots here back in July for our early adopters. We're just finishing up our second pilot. We have another 2 scheduled and another few in the works after that we hope to get scheduled. So we've had a lot of interest and a lot of like the early adopters are starting to actually adopt and purchase product, that kind of thing. So it's been very, very exciting journey, but it's been a very interesting journey as well. But at the end of the day, what it did for me that I really was kind of looking for was I was looking for a way to take the clinical knowledge and innovation drive and plug that into a startup where I wasn't the sole guy
Yeah.
and build my knowledge in the other areas that I don't have so that in the future I would actually be able to, an investor asks, what do you think your EBITDA is going to be after 5 years? I can say, oh, I know what you mean by that. Here's what it will
Yes.
be, rather than having to, ask ChatGPT, what is EBITDA?
Right. I love that you are someone who learns by doing. I think that is a very underrated skill
Mm,
to be either you might be blissfully unaware of it, but walk into a room, right, with a panel of investors and within a panel of business people as a nurse,
yeah.
either knowing or, like I said, maybe you blissfully don't know what you don't know, and still be willing to put yourself out there anyway. I think there are the people who I've met who possess that skill and who harness it to their advantage are some of the coolest and most successful people I have ever met. So I totally commend you. It is not an easy thing to do at all. And I hope that you see that skill as something that you have in your pocket at all times.
Well, I think that skill is one thing that we all have that we just don't realize we have. Like, there's a reason why if you've been an ICU nurse for 5 years and you go and apply for an ICU position, they're going to do everything in their power to get you versus if you've been an ICU nurse, never before, they're not as interested in you because you have the same education, but the experience and day-to-day exposure, you learn so much through that is really underrated. I
Yeah,
mean, that's the reason new grads find it hard to get a new job, whereas if you've had 2 years experience, it's really easy
right.
because that day-to-day exposure beyond just the head knowledge really makes a difference.
That's very true. That's a challenge that I'm facing right now as I'm applying for non-clinical roles
Mm.
of frequently hearing feedback of, we want someone with experience. And like, I faced the same challenge as a new grad coming out of PA school, right? We want someone with experience. We want someone with experience. And it's like, well, where do you expect me to get the experience?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious from you, what are one or two examples of things that your clinical expertise had direct impact on with building the line organizer with Crimson? Like, what were some things that you noticed that you just identified, like, this is not going to work into the nursing workflow, and how you changed those?
Yeah. Well, one of the very, very first things I got, because they sent me some samples when we were early in the discussions. The first thing I did was I pulled out the favorite pen I always used to use as a nurse, wrote on it, then tried to smear it. And boy, did it smear. It smeared bad.
So good.
And so I was
Yeah.
like, okay, number one thing you need to fix is the paper. We got to make it so it doesn't smear. And so,
Yes.
because the pens I use, it's like these, in fact, I have one right here. It's these G2 pens. I love these pens. They're so
Real
good.
ones love Pilot G2s. Are you
Yep.
a 1 millimeter guy or a 0.7 millimeter guy?
I 0.5. Yeah, the 0.5, I think, or
0.5?
0.7,
Okay.
whatever the small one is. But I love them. But they do smear if on a lot of surfaces. And so, they're so reliable, but they do smear on some surfaces. And so I was like, half the people I know use these things. And if they're smearing, you know, 10 seconds later, you're going to put them on a line, the line's going to rub it. All of a sudden, oh, that used to say leave a fed, now it's a mess. So you, yeah, so that was like right off the bat, one change that I recommended as a clinician, just knowing this is a great frustration because there's many things as a clinician you write on that smear very badly. Another one was their initial design. So they have, basically there's three parts to it. You have a label at the top near the IV bag that's pretty large. That's a different color for each line. Then you have clips in the middle of the line that you can use the clips lines together. And then downstream, you have a label. And that, when I first started, that used to just be kind of a colored clip that you put on there as a colored indicator. So you'd have red up there and you could trace the red back up to the label up here, which said, whatever was up there. And one piece of feedback that I had early on was like, we need to have a label of some kind downstream.
Yeah.
Because when you're out there at the bedside and there's a pick line and you got 10 lines running in, it's great that one, you can tell, oh, this one's red, this one's purple, but I don't, have to look and find what was red again. It's going to be way better if there's a label there. And our very, very first product development pilot, we still had the mold from the first design. So we had just used that design. And it was one of those things, I think probably one of the most common pieces of feedback we had from that trial was, we need to have a label down there. We want a label, we can't just use the colors. It's like, as a clinician, you just kind of pick up on those things where you can save a lot of time in that development stage where you just kind of intuitively know certain things that are going to work, certain
Yep.
things that aren't going to work, that you don't have to necessarily go out there and prove, or you can go out there and prove, but with a background of knowledge behind
Yeah.
it.
Amazing. Those are to a clinician, feels like very low-hanging fruit
Mm-hmm.
solutions. And I have been amazed when I had some opportunities to participate in hackathons over the past 6 to 9 months or so. And I was amazed having conversations with engineers, with
Mm-hmm.
product managers, with everyone across the life cycle of a software or hardware development, um, who have not even a single clue. There's no
Yeah.
visibility into real clinical workflows and real conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working through a project right now, and in a conversation that I had, I mentioned a sort of common comment from a patient that I encounter probably a dozen times in a week. And their response was, do people really say that to you? Do they really describe it that way?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think part of the mission of this podcast is also to raise awareness for clinicians of, like, do not underestimate your skills. The value that you bring simply by having, like your, business advisor said, at least 1 year on the ground is incredible. Like, it actually is so high impact. And I think a lot of us don't realize how easy we can give visibility into product development and innovation in general.
Well, we're exposed to the clinical role and clinical speak and clinical think in patients so much that we forget. I mean, we know even working bedside, you would say, "Oh, you got some edema." Oh, what's that?
Yeah.
It's just a term that we use that we're so familiar with that we forget there's people out there that don't know what that means. In fact, a large portion of people out there that don't know what that means.
Yep.
And it is very, very true. One of the greatest things that frustrates clinicians who are in the innovation space is you see companies out there who have a clinical product geared towards clinicians for clinical use and don't have a clinician anywhere in the product development cycle. And that's really common. And as a clinician, you look at their product that they spent sometimes millions and millions of dollars developing, and you're like, it's missing this. Like,
Yeah.
a great example was actually was during nursing school. There was some company locally that was developing some software, and they gave nursing students, a $5 coffee card if you come and use their software as users. And it was, of course, $5 for coffee. Like, yes, please.
Yeah.
Um, and
You're aging
for
yourself,
them,
Caleb.
yeah, exactly. And, yeah, right, sure. Um, but then it was, for them, it was free fodder. You can't get a real clinician to come in, who's
Yeah.
completed their training and,
Sure.
makes a wage. But, nursing students, yeah, we'll do that. So they came in and we had this software. And I remember they had all these different tasks and they were just watching what we did. And one of the tasks I remember very distinctly was enter an order for a leg x-ray. So I go in and I'm like, which leg? They're like, oh, we don't have that feature. Like, okay, you might want to
Oh
have
my
that feature.
gosh.
It's so obvious to any clinician. Like, it matters a lot what leg you're x-ray. But to them, they didn't think, oh yeah, we have to be able to specify which leg because, whatever the billing code I'm sure that they're basing it off of just has leg x-ray in there. And,
Right.
you know, you see companies sometimes that'll roll out products with things like that. It's not
Yeah.
something that people who aren't used to the clinical role think of. So it's very, very interesting. And there's a huge need for it that we just often don't appreciate.
Yeah, so I'm curious, in a recent newsletter, Christina Farr, who publishes Second Opinion, she commented that a clinical leader who can also drive product development is one of the rarest archetypes of, they were talking specifically about CMOs, but I think
Uh,
that that conversation might apply in this context as well. So I'm curious, what are the skills that clinicians have that can specifically drive product development? And more specifically, I would love if you can talk a little bit more on what that actually looks like, right? I would love to say, oh, I drive product development and wrap that up in a little box and ship it away. But again, part of what I, really want to give visibility into on this podcast is what that really looks like. What is the nitty gritty? What are the workflows? What is kind of the day to day?
yeah, great question. The biggest thing that clinicians can add value to when it comes to product development, I feel personally, is clearly identifying the problem you're solving. I have seen so many pieces of software or devices out there that are really great solutions to problems we don't have. And we've invested, however much, and it is always crazy amounts. You can raise $2 million if you say AI, and you see AI software as it's like, that's great, but no one's going to use it because we don't want to have to go exit out of Epic and go find your app and pull up your app. And, it gives us differential possibilities of what could be, you know, we can come up with those ourselves and we're probably not going to be like, oh, I'm really not confident in my ability enough for I'm going to go and, use this app unless it's a really rare use case or something. And so what you end up with is you end up with a lot of problems solved that are problems. And as a clinician, you're able to come in and say, like, it's great your product does this, but the reason people are going to use it is because it does this right here that's a problem for us. And so being able to clearly articulate the problem is a huge value add. It is, I will say, a value add that even some product developers don't understand there's a huge need for. That even people that develop products for a living sometimes fall into the trap of trying to develop a solution that might not really fit a problem, or
Sure.
developing it in such a way that they don't take into consideration clinical workflows. I remember being at a conference one time. It was actually for a clinical lab conference that I was working for a client doing a project that was kind of related. But someone talking about this device that they had created for basically shaving pathology specimens into the little layers that they need,
Hmm.
automated instead of manually. And they said one thing that they learned through that, if I'm recalling correctly, was that they learned to always have someone who's not an engineer in the room with the engineers. Because one of the things that the engineers had done is they had designed a solution that worked really, really well, but they had completely not thought through people need to clean this between each use. It had been designed really well, it functioned really well, but actually cleaning it between uses was not possible the way it was designed. And so there's steps like that in the product development that are going to be omitted that a clinician who uses whatever the product is will stop and think like, well, yeah, but that's going to not work because of this. And being able to say that you can save companies tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just a matter of conveying that value to companies and then providing it. And really, it's not that hard as a clinician. Like, you don't need special training or anything to understand, like, how do I add value? It's just hearing the product, looking at it. Would I use this? Being a big question, because a lot of times you can have products that, like, one of the big things we ran into with Crimson Medical is trying to find a way to make it usable with nursing workflows, because nurses don't want to spend a bunch of extra time putting something on the IV line. And even if it has, 10 seconds longer to set up, the use time is going to be a lot less. So, we came up with ways where you could put the device on, these clips on one hand, just a single pinch motion, get on the line versus having to take the line and put it on. Even just those little things, like as a nurse, you kind of intuitively understand them, and then it's just a matter of surfacing it and realizing, like, actually stopping and thinking through, like, if I didn't use this product, what would be the reason? And then I easily identify, like, oh, this part or this process, or it won't work well for this step. And that can add a lot of value in that process too.
Yeah. Well, you seem to have a knack for understanding the real pain points of clinicians, whether that is something that like you were put on this earth to do, or maybe it is just the skills that truly you've developed as a clinician. It sounds like you have a gift of kind of translating those insights into things that really help both businesses to market to people in the healthcare space and in your ventures in product development, and especially with the IB manager with Crimson Medical. It's really, really fantastic to see. And I think you did such a great job of explaining it can be that simple. Can it be that simple? Can
It
it really
can.
be that simple? It's crazy.
Well, I
So
think I think we all have that in us though, like, because
yeah,
one thing you have is, like, you go every day you've seen your shift, like, man, I wish we didn't have to do this, or this was different, or this process. It's just coming up with solutions beyond the, man, this is a pain. Like, well, how could I solve this? And we do it add value.
right. Fantastic. So, if there are any nurse innovators amongst us or any clinician innovators who might have a problem that they want to solve, a pain point that they've identified, what are some things that you would encourage them to do first?
And that's a really good question. And I guess it depends too on what the pain point or the problem is. Um, I would say that it can be very, very valuable to connect with and get the advice of people who are in the business side, who can help you think through the business model, because especially if you've never kind of gone through that before, having a sustainable business model, understanding who's going to buy it, how much they're going to spend, how you're going to make the manufacturing, all that kind of stuff matters. And it's stuff that you have to think through. It's things that are hard if you've never done it before. A really, really great um, resource can be nurse innovators, people who have actually gone through that before, who have actually done it before. And there's a small but kind of growing community of nurse innovators. Rebecca Love is very active in that space and nurse approved. Um, and there's several out there that are in that space who have done that before, who have help to lead that process, who can kind of guide you through, where they're not going to have to baby you through, like, and you might get a business person telling you, well, here's what the problem probably actually is. Like, no, that's not
Yeah.
the problem. So,
Yeah.
you avoid that side of it, but then you also kind of get they understand what the knowledge gaps are.
Fantastic. And in your opinion, if we continue to put clinicians at the forefront of clinical innovation, what are some things that will be developed in the next 10 years?
That's a good question. If I knew the answer to that one, I would be trying to develop them myself. But no, I mean, I think obviously one thing that is um, very much at the forefront of everybody's mind in the innovation space right now is AI.
Yeah.
Um, I think AI can you can very easily fall into the trap of AI being the answer, and now let's go search for the question. Um, and there's a lot of people in AI who are very technologically minded who aren't understanding those clinical needs. So bringing clinicians to the front of that, I think, is a very, very big, um, very, very big need. And I think that having clinicians identify the problems that AI can solve that weren't solvable before is a really big need that I don't really hear a lot of people talking that much about. I know there are companies in that space, but
Yeah.
it can be very, we have the hammer, now let's go out and look for nails, rather than, will it actually work on that? Does that need to be nailed in? There's those questions that, you don't often think about, that, like, or at least people who are really focused on the AI don't think about, where we really just need better identification of the problem.
Totally. I love it. Well, that could be a really great potential consulting gig for
Mm.
anyone who has pain points, sort of looking for how do I bring this solution to market, and how do I even maybe just experiment with a team of trying to build it and seeing how far we go. Once again, I really, really appreciate our conversation. We're wrapping up on our time here. Thank you so much for telling us all about your journey from New Zealand to Philadelphia, from working at the bedside to a marketing agency, continuing on multiple tried and I use the word failed because I think that once we reframe that idea of failure into like, no, just do another rep. Just do another
Hmm.
rep. Like this is part of the process, that it really ends up being a great accomplishment. So I will just say failure, right? And continuing down that path of innovation and pursuing things that are actually going to help people like you and I. So it was really great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for all of the information that you've given us and all of the valuable lessons to take away.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. And if the listeners want to maybe reach out to you, maybe you could be that innovator point of contact for them to kind of run an idea by them, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn is probably the best way. Um, Always happy to connect with clinicians who are getting into the innovation space or have questions about it. We need more people out there helping with innovation. So definitely always happy to help where I can.
Awesome. And the link to Caleb's Instagram will be in the show notes, so check it out there. Again, I'm Kayla. I'm a PA on a mission to figure out what it's really like to work in health tech and to push the status quo of what we can really do with our clinical titles. Thanks for joining us for an episode of Corporate Espionage, and we will see you next time.